without clear guidelines. Other definitions like essential services and digital technology are also said to be vague, while the Ministry of Communications and Innovation sees the bill as vital for protecting Botswana's digital space, but says it must be clearer, fairer and aligned with existing laws. IT and data privacy professional Baboloki Mokete joins this conversation to discuss how Botswana can create a strong cybersecurity law that protects digital spaces but also remains clear and fair. Good evening and welcome to Botswana Tonight.
Thank you for having me.
We do have a cybersecurity bill here. My understanding is that it has gone through a number of consultations with a number of stakeholders, and yet we are here finding ourselves with the Attorney General saying some things are not clear, some things are not, some things are vague. Some things, particularly when you talk to the number of bodies that the bill seeks to establish. With the Attorney General saying some of these things may actually have overlapping mandates, may create duplicity. So the question is, as somebody in the industry, in the sector, how extensive were these consultations for us to be with a document that is said some things are not okay?
I think it's an interesting development, one coming from the AG to be questioning some of, the things within the bill itself. And also, if you look into some of the consultations that have been done, I think the last one was about 2 weeks ago, where maybe finalization was done with some of the stakeholders there. For me, I would say, yes, there's been consultation, but I don't think it has been that much extensive. Looking at some of the points that the AG has raised in there, that means maybe some players within the industry have not been consulted in terms of their input to be able to help in terms of building up such a strong cybersecurity law. Hence why maybe we're seeing some of the questions that are coming from the AG in terms of some of the things that we're seeing being included in there and them needing clarity. I think it's also important for us to have an oversight body like that one that now seeks to delve deeper into what has been put down in terms of some of the laws that we're seeing there, and also making sure that before it goes before Parliament, maybe some of these things are discussed and cleared out in detail, because we know once it goes into Parliament, it might be something that is difficult for some of these things to be reversed or discussed in a better way than maybe before it goes into Parliament. And I think, as we know, it might be going into the winter Parliament as it is ongoing right now.
It's interesting because, yes, it is gazetted, and yet there are these concerns. Are you saying we may see it going through that process with these concerns? And as you answer that, I also want to understand in terms of the extensiveness of the consultation, in terms of the expertise that formed a part of this consultation.
I may not be privy much to those that were engaged, especially in terms of expertise to be able to be part of this, except maybe here and there from different sectors, those that were, called in to come in and give in their input. I know some of the sectors, maybe within the public sector, your health, your communications and all, some of them, were included. Maybe the question would be in terms of the private sector, how many, people with the expertise were invited, especially those that are already, working with, working within the field itself of cybersecurity. For that, I might not be certain in terms of those that have been engaged. But in terms of also when you look at the capacity in terms of the space itself, we're still lagging behind, especially in terms of upskilling and all. That is one area that we still need more, people to be, trained and be able to reach that level of expertise. So for me, I would say maybe there have been a bit of lack of oversight in terms of those that were, from time to time engaged, because obviously when you formulate something like this, it goes through a series of consultations before maybe a formulation of what we would now term as a bill that we are now seeing, being taken into Parliament or being gazetted, as you see, being something that is a document of value that one can speak to. So for me, I would say there is that worry, especially looking at the fact that the AG is the one that is really raising these points and these concerns to say these are certain things that we have to be cleared out for us to be saying now we have a strong cybersecurity bill that can be discussed or debated on in Parliament.
Okay, I suppose what I also want to find out from you as a professional, yes, the AG has raised about 6 issues with the bill, but let's just maybe focus on some of them. Creating a number of bodies that may have overlapping mandates. From your view, how would that be a problem insofar as either from an enforcement perspective, either from a governance perspective? Isn't it the more the merrier? I'm just really being a devil's advocate here.
When it comes to enforcement, it becomes a problem if we have different agencies looking into the same thing. Here we're also looking at duplication of effort in terms of all that has to do with the law itself. Now the public out there would wonder, where do I go when I want to report something to do with cybersecurity? Because now there are several agencies in place for this law, which now borders on who do I go to and how do they handle these kind of issues. Maybe I go to a certain agency and they tell me that no, here we don't deal with that. You can go to maybe agency B, and then it becomes a series of maybe steps for you to eventually get to the right one that would eventually deal with your case. But also you are looking at the fact that in terms of the fact that these things also requires resources. Are we resourced enough for us to be able to have several agencies looking into the same thing? For me, I don't think we have quite enough. And also looking at the capacity that I just spoke to, we don't have much as a country in terms of the space itself. Looking at the cybersecurity space, yes, there are individuals here and there that we can talk about, or private companies that we can talk about that are already in space. But in terms of capacitation, there is a lot that is going to be done in terms of us being at par to be able to enforce such a law, because there are so many things in there that needs people with understanding of what is really in there and be able to interpret it quite well. So for me, looking at already existing agencies like Botswana Police, which is looking at the cyber crime, you have BOCRA that is looking at communications within the space itself. You have also the Data Protection Commission Office, which is looking at the Data Protection Act. Now you want to add more to that is going to create a bit of a complex situation when it comes to dealing with cybersecurity.
Okay, I suppose now this also brings the question. You mentioned a number of entities that already, to some extent, would deal with issues of cyber and data on that level. How then does this act either complement in its current form, as is with the criticism that it has? How does it complement, if it does in any way, any of the bodies that you've talked about? Similarly, those bodies are established by acts of parliament as well. So how does this complement what we already have, if it does?
I think it is quite extensive when it speaks to cyber security infrastructure, because I think that's where it pinpoints its value in terms of what it's going to bring on board. Looking at the fact that with already existing ones, there's that gap when it comes to infrastructure. With this one now, it's going to bring in more in terms of the space itself. Like I said, in terms of private entities, they're already advanced more than the government itself in terms of what they can offer within the space, even though we know that some of the security agencies within the country, they are also resourced in terms of that. But when we speak to the infrastructure itself, that is where now we're going to see more extensive investment from the government side in terms of what it's going to be able to cover. But also the worry is also in terms of how it blends with other existing laws or acts, or if I may say, looking at the Data Protection Act, for example, there isn't much that we are seeing. It's quite vague when it speaks to data privacy and how it's going to be guarded within the law itself, because when you speak to cybersecurity, there is that element of interception of communication. If we see there's a threat coming from there, now the question is, once they're able to do that, what then can can they be able to do that borders on oversight in terms of how far they can go. Now, this is where we say it should be able to blend so well or align so well with the Data Protection Act, which seeks to, protect personal data, because with the Act itself, it does permit security agencies to be able to tap into a communication between me and you if they suspect that it might be some sort of a threat to national security. But the question is, once they have that data, what can they do with it? Or even more, beyond what they are supposed to be doing. And when we speak to limitation of what they can be able to, listen in on, can they be able to, can it be able to be guarded, especially looking at the fact that that is where the data protection, comes in, because there is also worry for the media, because they look into, so many stories as they're investigating them and all. Okay. And we know they have to protect some of their, sources in a way. But if the agencies are able to tap into that, then it becomes a challenge for journalists and the media at large.
You talk about infrastructure, and I'm curious to find out, as far as the bill itself is concerned, how do we define that infrastructure that you're talking about? What is that infrastructure? Yeah,
it's the kind that we'll be able to speak much more to the protection of the digital space, the digital systems, the networks and everything, because already if you look at some of the threats that exist out there in terms of malicious attacks, unauthorized access, those are the things that we are looking at when we speak into cybersecurity that has to be guarded at most. So when you look at the infrastructure, we are looking at the kind that will be able to protect the digital space, the systems itself, maybe within government as well as in private. We're also looking at the kind that can be able to protect our data within the country and all, because once there are breaches and all, then the national security and everyone at large is at risk. So when we speak to the cyber security infrastructure, we are looking at the one that will be able to cover up for most of those, especially in the public sector.
Okay. Yeah. I think in as much as we're talking about the cyber security bill and some of the criticism that is attracted, I'm inclined to say to us, let's just go back to the Data Protection Act. Yeah. And that it is in operation. Yes. Now. And from my point of view, and I stand to be corrected, there's a lot of gaps in terms of how it's being implemented. You can move from office to office. There's a lot of gaps. And we're talking about things that are within the same ecosystem here. And here we are now trying to bring in another bill within the same ecosystem. And I want to tie this to how do they feed into each other and how do they sort of speak to each other. If the adoption of the Data Protection Act is found wanting as we speak, and we are here now, what can we do to ensure that even with this criticism, we are still able to do something about security and ensure that adoption is what it ought to be, given what we've learned from the Data Protection Act?
Yeah, I think one thing that have always been said about our country is that we have, quite a number of good policies. The biggest challenge is always implementation. So that is where the gap that you are talking about in terms of, the data protection we are seeing. I don't think the office has done so much in terms of, a capacitation in terms of the public for them to understand what the Act is all about and what it seeks to help the public with, in terms of protection of their personal data. And that is, what we still see. It's like the Act is not, in force, because we're still seeing people doing the things the same way they did them before the Act was enacted into law. And that is something that also borders on the concern that now with the cybersecurity coming in, how well are we going to now ensure that it is not just a policy that sits there and gathers that, but it's also one that is enforced to ensure that all that we are seeing as challenges within the cyberspace, especially when it comes to attacks and all, it's something of the past, and we are seeing that people are quite cautious in terms of what happens within the cyberspace, and also to ensure that national security is of paramount importance to us, looking at what the Act seeks to address. Not only that, but also other factors that we can look into that the the law itself speaks to looking at some of the things that have been outlined within the act. So it's for me, the worry has always been the fact that as a country we do come up with some of these good policies, run them through parliament, have them adopted and all, but when it comes to implementation now, that is where our biggest challenge is always at, and that is something that we need to really plug into and ensure that it's a thing of the past when it comes to maybe some of these policies, because they're quite important to how things can be done better as compared to prior to them being adopted and all.
As things stand now, how vulnerable are we as far as cybersecurity is concerned, and what needs to happen to really ensure that over and above the bill as we have it now, to ensure that we tighten the loose screws?
Yeah, I think as a country within the ecosystem that is the world, we're also vulnerable to attacks, and we've seen quite a number of attacks that have been happening across the world. Maybe some have been intercepted before they happen to our country. When you talk about terrorist attacks and all, those are things that much of the time happens within the cyberspace, and that what the law itself seeks to try and protect us from. Not only that, but also some of the essential services that we do have that borders on cybersecurity. We need to ensure that as a country we are quite up to par with what is happening within the global space, and not be left behind and exposed as we are right now before this law is enacted. Yes, there are other laws that have been there, or maybe if you look at the Cybercrime Act that is currently being enforced by the Botswana police, it does cover up for some of those, but it's not enough, or it's not adequate. That's why we are having the Cybersecurity Bill being pushed into Parliament at this present moment. So there is so much that we can do to ensure that as a country we are quite protected in terms of anything that can happen within the cyberspace, because it's quite a big web that we need to also be able to deal with it, and deal with it decisively to ensure that we are not so much vulnerable as we probably may be at the moment.
With some of the points that the AG has raised, could we see a point where, and again I want us to really use the Data Protection Act, because it's one of the most recent as far as IT and digital transformation is concerned. We saw it being passed, we saw it being deferred, we saw it being amended. There was a lot of things that happened in the space of 3 years, if I'm not mistaken, for it to end up being operationalized. Do we foresee a situation like that where we are going to say, hang on, the world has moved and the AG has come up with so many questions, perhaps let's go back again and see how we tighten some of the things that have been questioned? Or do we see the ministry saying, let's hold it, let's get our ducks in a row, such that when we go forward, it's a seamless exercise?
It's a dicey situation, one that speaks to the fact that it's the AG here that is speaking to some of these legalities that they are seeing as flawed within the act that needs to be addressed, and that is something that is of great concern. And the big question is, do we allow for it to go to Parliament as it's gazetted, or do we say, okay, let's take it a step back and try to address some of these gaps that we are already seeing before it can be debated in Parliament, and be able to ensure that we are covered in all aspects, especially with those points that has been raised by the AG, and then take it back to Parliament for it to be passed. Or we say, okay, let's go ahead with what we have put together and continue working on it with time, because it does allow, I think Parliament does allow for some of these changes to be made over time, as we have seen with some of the policies that have been debated and approved with government, that at a later stage we see them being amended to include maybe the latest trends or any position that we might be seeing as precarious within the act. So for me, I foresee a dicey situation, especially from the ministry endpoint, as well as from the AG, in terms of what do they then then do should this bill go into Parliament and be debated with the flaws that they have already pointed out?
In its current form, does it strike a balance in your view between national security, businesses, and you and I?
For me, I would say not so much. If you look at, one of the points that have been raised by the AG, it's around data protection and how it doesn't align to, the data subject rights and all. That is something of a big importance, looking at that the Data Protection Act has been recently enacted into law. And if you're bringing something after it that is not aligned to it, then it's a worry for me and you, because now it says that anything can happen to our data that we might not be in control of. But when it comes to business, and also you are looking at some of the things that have been included in there that the AG has raised, that are questioning the fit and proper clause that has been included there, to say it's not quite clear, and it's something that has to be addressed probably before the bill can go into Parliament.
Thank you so much. We were speaking to IT and data privacy professional Baboloki Mokete, speaking to us about some of the issues that the AG and other stakeholders have raised concerning the Cybersecurity Bill, which is currently gazetted with the expectation that it shall be tabled in this winter Parliament.
Le dithuto tsa tiro a diatla tota ke dithuto tse eleng gore di rutuntsha batho mo di-skillseng materialo tse eleng gore di tlhokiwa ke economy yaanong tiro a diatla re bitsa re